Good evening. I'm Beko Pin, and this is In the Running Rappler special coverage for national candidates in the 2022 elections. Just a few minutes ago, CNN Philippines held the first vice presidential debate with Walden Bellier, Rizalito David, Manny S.D. Lopez, Willie Ong, Senator Kiko Pangilinan, Carlos Serapio, and Senate President Tito Soto. Survey frontrunner Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte skipped the debate, instead opting to campaign in Zamboanga Peninsula. Buhay Representative Lito Atienza, who had earlier confirmed his attendance, later begged off due to a knee replacement surgery, according to CNN Philippines. Let's make sense of what happened. Joining me in today's all-woman panel, please welcome Editor-at-Large Marites Vitog and Rappler's Head of Regional Bureaus Inday Espina Verona. Also joining us are Rappler reporters Lee and Buwan, who covers the Uniteam campaign and the Justice Beat, and Sofia Toba Cruz, who covers foreign affairs and the pandemic response. Campaign reporters will also be joining us later to chime in on the vice presidential candidates they cover. Let's begin with who stood out. Was there a candidate who stood out earlier? May exchange ba na nag-stand out, or parang hanggang ngayon, kumbaga living in your heads rent-free after the vice presidential debates of CNN Philippines? Maybe you can go with Marites first.
Yeah, if I may just start it, I think Walden Bello was the life of the debate, life of the party. It was very clear from the start that he did not make this, he did not really intend to win. I mean, he doesn't intend to win the election. He just wanted to bring out the issues, make the issues sharper, and call out candidates who have been enablers, at least the person of Tito Soto, who he says was an enabler of the Duterte administration. So that, as we were talking about earlier, Bea and the other ladies here, that reminded, I think, the public of the role of Senator Tito Soto as Senate President, that he does not agree with the numbers given by various NGOs and even the UN Human Rights Council on the extrajudicial killings committed during Duterte's drug war.
Inday?
Yeah, well, the powers of disruption that Walden showed tonight were pretty impressive, you know, and even the host had a little hard time trying to rein him in. But also, it's not just so much that they they're not out to win because they've never said that actually. But I think for Walden and Leody, standard bearer, it's very, very important for them to bring their platform, the radical worldview out. And certainly Walden did tonight, even as he went to get some element of accountability from Tito Soto. Well, there's also Kiko Pangilinan, but it was mostly really Tito Soto that he was after with.
Kumbaga minsan na may impression na damay na lang si Senator Pangilinan because he's also senator. We'll talk about Walden Bello a little more later on. Pero Lian, as my Uniteam partner, yung elephant in the room nga dito ay hindi na naman nagdalo yung isang Uniteam member in a debate, Sara Duterte. Instead, nag-ikot siya sa Zamboanga Peninsula earlier. Is this... What do you make of this? Like, what do you make of this decision for Sarah to skip the CNN Philippines debate? She also said pala, through her spokesperson the other day, that she also intends on skipping all of the COMELEC-sponsored debates. Wala pang date na binibigay, pero sure na sila na they won't be attending it. Lian?
Alam mo, before she, through her spokesperson, Mayor Frasco, said that they will not likely attend all debates, I didn't expect Mayor Sara to be debate averse. I remember Mayor Sara as the sheriff punching mayor, yung walang inuurungan. And I remember her also from 2019 where kahit hindi siya yung nangangampanya, siya yung muka ng hugpong ng pagbabago. And would go the mile of justifying her quote na parang honesty should not be an election issue. Di ba? Parang yun yung, that was the web that she got herself in. Pero game na game siyang sumagot, mag-justify. So before this tenor of not attending debates, I did not expect Mayor Sara to be debate averse. And that says a lot about how the Uniteam is strategizing. So, Bea, if I can toss it back to you, tingin mo kung nandun si Mayor Sara, ano bang mangyayari?
Alam mo yun kasi yung mahirap, I think, for the unity well, one of the few things na mahirap for them, no, considering na sobrang frontrunner sila sa surveys, they don't have the explicit endorsement of President Duterte, pero bit-bit, at hindi sila technically continuity candidates in the sense na may basbas ni Duterte, may basbas ng ruling party. PDP Laban Cell calls itself the ruling party even though wala silang standard bearers in 2022. Pero meron kang ganun, but at the same time, ayaw nilang ma-attach sa baggage of being the continuity candidate, being the admin candidate. If Sarah were here, I imagine mapipilit siyang maging continuity candidate with the pitfalls of being a continuity candidate in that. Kaya niyang, parang she has to start answering questions about the Duterte policy, the war on drugs, about ICC, di ba? Parang ang dami ng, and even the pandemic response, parang maybe, I can't claim to know what's going on in her mind or in the minds of her campaign strategists, no? Pero I would imagine they'd want to avoid putting her in that situation wherein she has to answer, kumbaga, for the sins of the Duterte
Hmm.
administration. Pero at the same time, when she campaigns, she says that she will continue the gains of the Duterte administration. So parang, kumbaga, she wants her cake and eat it too.
I
Pero
think
siguro, Bea, importante, she doesn't want to have to answer
Yeah,
to questions about Bongbong Marcos,
yeah.
about Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Medyo mas mahirap yon kasi nagtatago yung isa, and if Sara goes to the debate, Sara will have to answer those questions.
and
Yeah.
I think Bea, it's also a calculated risk because their
Yeah.
numbers are high, they're doing well, and as we've noticed in the Uniteam strategy, at least for Bongbong Marcos, silence is golden. Silence is the way not to. Maybe they've seen it doesn't really erode their numbers.
Yeah. Parang may nakausap nga ako over the weekend, sorry, hindi pala weekend, over the week while covering in Iloilo na parang there's an impression also na baka, kumbaga nagpupondo sila ng numbers before the, like, yung thick of the campaign talaga, so mga around March and April. So parang, and the concern is maybe if they do, parang, put, join these debates and in a way, leave themselves vulnerable because that's what you do, right? When you join a debate, you leave yourself vulnerable to difficult questions, difficult issues, baka mag-erode earlier than they want to yung numbers nila because they are very high. And when you have high numbers, there's no way else to go but down. Thank you, Lian. Siguro, okay, after we talk about Sara Duterte and, her absence, I like the touch of CNN constantly cutting to the empty podium whenever she would be mentioned, most notably by Belio kanina. Let's talk about one of the things that parang more in fairness more or less medyo malawak yung pag-discuss kanina na yung maritime issues nga. Una, para siguro maliwanagan tayong lahat, ano ba yung quad na yan, Sofia? At bakit ba to pinag-uusapan kanina? Or bakit to na-bring up kanina sa debate?
Well, to be honest, I don't know why it was brought up kasi, well, it was brought up in the context of Bello rebutting what Pangilinan said when he mentioned that he would engage ASEAN. Later on, Bello brought up Quad. But anyway, Quad is basically a four-country grouping composed of the United States, Australia, Japan, and India, which is, it spans many areas: security, economic development, humanitarian aid and everything. And it's relevant again once more because of the competition between the US and China. And so the Quad is an important element of the US's strategy in trying to combat, of course, China's influence, especially in the region. And you need power, you need countries like Japan and Australia and India to compete with to help the US, compete with China and shore up its influence here. So, in that respect, that is also something that was brought up in the debate in the forum. I think the recent forum by SMNI. No, so perhaps that's why it was brought up. But then I think it's an interesting discussion that we're having because, well, and maybe Marites can also add to this because, you know, the Philippines, isn't part of the Quad. And I think there have been questions like, should we be part? Well, for one, We aren't invited to join the Quad, but we are. I think it's important to note that we are aligned with the countries. Japan is a very important partner. It's our biggest. I think it's our, if I'm not mistaken, it's still our biggest source of development aid. And um, the US is a treaty partner. We have a status of forces agreement with Australia and India. I know we are ramping up relations with them, especially after the foreign minister visited just the Philippines after a meeting with the Quad in Australia.
Maritas, parang more or less this is the first time for the vice presidential candidates to expound on their, I don't want to say their policies kasi di naman sila pwede mag-impose ng polisiya kahit manalo pa sila as vice president, pero yung where they stand in terms of maritime issues. Did any of the answers earlier stand out to you, or were there problematic answers from the vice presidential candidates earlier?
Una, yung takeaway ko, yung realization ko is that we should really pala vote for a good vice president. Kasi napakalawak ng areas na kailangan malaman nila because they are the successor to the president. So dun sa maritime issues, na-strike ako dun sa sinabi nga ni Senator Kiko about building alliances. I think that's where nagkamali nga si Bolden Bello. Senator Kiko said the Coast Guard should resume. Hindi naman yata natigil. I don't know,
That's
Sophia,
true.
hindi naman natigil yung pagpapatrol ng Coast Guard sa West Philippine Sea. Ang medyo sensitive nung sinabi ni Senator Kiko na yung Navy ang mapapatrol kasi yun yung it's mistake, it means to be sending warships. So it's not a civilian mission. So I think there's some sensitivity there na maybe he meant in another context.
Just to add a little bit to what Marites said, no. I think also what stood out for me was, well, first of all, Pangilinan also knows, I think, the issue, because first of all, he started off with the correct terms, talking about the West Philippine Sea and it being, we're talking about the exclusive economic zone, and we're talking about it being, an issue of our resources there. And that stands in contrast, of course, to what Marcos said last week about, mixing up his terms, calling the waters in the West Philippine Sea territorial waters, and all the experts, Justice Scarpio, the director of the UP Maritime Center, Dr. J. Batong Bakal, they all disputed that. It shows that there's a lack of understanding. So Pangilinan definitely showed that he had an understanding of the issue. But I think what also stood out to me was what Soto mentioned about the Maritime Zones Bill. I think it opened a discussion about, well, of course, it drew on his experience as a legislator and also opened a discussion about some of the things we can do here through our Congress. And that's also an important discussion to have because when we finally pass measures like the Philippine Maritime Zones bill, then, the issue of the West Philippine Sea is also less politicized. It strengthens our position. It strengthens the institutions like the DFA, so that it's less prone to all these changing of positions whenever a new administration comes in.
Lian?
Singit ko lang na kaya naman na-mention yung Quad. Si Walden Bello yung nag-mention because Senator Kiko Pangilinan nga was saying that he wants to build alliances with the ASEAN. And then yung rebuttal ni Congressman Walden Bello was saying that bakit mo gustong humanay sa Quad? And Senator Kiko Pangilinan wanted to say, teka lang, wala akong sinabing Quad. And I think we have a footage of Senator Kiko Pangilinan actually answering and not mentioning Quad at all. So maybe we can play that muna.
To fight for our rights over the waters of our exclusive economic zone and not be subservient. Hindi tayo pwedeng sunod-sunuran sa China. Gusto natin makipagkaibigan sa China pero wag naman dahil sa pagkakaibigan natin sa kanila i-give up na natin yung 550,000 square kilometers of sovereign and exclusive economic zone. Alam mo, tinataboy ang ating mga mangingisda, ipaglaban natin ang ating soberenya. Dati, ang kinikita nila 40 to 60,000 a month dahil nakakapunti sila doon sa malayo. Ngayon dahil wala na yung Coast Guard, wala na yung Navy, talagang hindi na sila, wala nang pumoprotekta sa kanila. So dapat i-resume yung patrol, dapat i-resume yung Coast Guard para pag naroon yung ating mga mangingisda, meron silang takbuhan. Number one. Number two, para tumaas ang kanilang kita. Ngayon, 3,000 pesos a month na lang ang kinikita. Kulang-kulang pa. Panggasolina lang. So kawawa ang ating mangingisda. And so we have to fight for our exclusive economic zone. That is energy security dahil maraming oil dyan at gas reserves. That is food security dahil maraming isda dyan at aquamarine resources. Ipaglaban natin yung arbitral ruling. Dahil atin ang West Philippine Sea.
So that was the answer of Senator Kiko Pangilinan. The question, to be clear, was, are you prepared to take the maritime dispute to another level, premised upon, since Vice President ka, if you have to take over. But yeah, that was the answer of Senator Kiko Pangilinan. We will bring in now Pia Ranada. She covers the Isko Moreno and Willie Ong tandem. Pia, kamusta naman si Doc Willie kanina and his white suit? Na very doctor nga naman ang vibe niya kanina sa debate.
Yeah, he really set the tone for himself na parang he was really saying na I will play the doctor card to the hilt, and napansin nga natin na for many of the answers that maybe not necessarily health issue yung perspective that you would think right away, he gave a health perspective. Like, di ba nung tinanong siya about internet access, I think his only direct response was to mention Isko Moreno's plan to set up a fiber optic network around the country, but the rest of his answer parang was just a panoply of statistics on health issues plaguing children, like yung malnutrition, stunting, diarrhea. So, di ba, parang off the bat, hindi siya ganun ka-direct an answer to the question. So, you could really see na, on one hand, probably hindi siya well-versed in the technical terms on internet technology, but he also wanted to show na, yung alam ko, yung strengths ko, ay health. So, he talked about health issues of children. So, siguro, para for me, it played to it was good for him naman that he, kasi if he wala siyang doctor card, diba, he could easily meld into the crowd of blazers, but his white suit and his doctor background kind of gave him an edge and made him unique, made him a standout in his own way. And siguro if not for the Walden Bello, Tito Sen, and Kiko Pangilinan showdown we saw on stage, baka forgettable si Willie Ong, but because parang kumbaga nag-contrast yung kanyang calmness, yung kanyang, 'di ba, unwillingness to fight or to parang throw barbs at anyone. So in a way, it kind of made him. I think it reflected well on him because parang kumbaga he was out of that fight. And if you're looking for a candidate who's not controversial and just sticking to his strengths, then I would think you would be happy with Willie Ong's performance.
Kumbaga, stick to what you know siya. Tapos napansin ko rin kay Willie Ong kanina, parang compared to the other vice presidential candidates, banggit siya ng banggit ng Isko Moreno. Parang sa bawat sagot niya, may sinisingit siya na policy in Manila or ito yung nagawa ni Isko Moreno, which we will do, whatever. Parang ganun parati yung train of thought niya.
Sobrang consistent siya. And which is why I found it kind of a lost opportunity for CNN Philippines not to have asked about the Willie Ong erasure in Maguindanao. Kasi
Yeah.
diba, sobrang loyal talaga niya kay Isko Moreno despite, what happened in Mindanao last week. And kasi he prepared for this eh. Like, I know na parang Monday or Sunday pa lang, si Lito Banaya flew back to Manila from the Mindanao sortie to help Willie Ong prepare. And I'm pretty sure talagang it was in the notes of his to really mention Isko Moreno's projects and legacy in Manila.
Yeah. Actually, ngayong I took note of that also kasi they did ask several candidates, parang kumbaga off-tandem pairing, but ironically, they didn't ask Willie Ong about it. Ma'am, hindi nabanggit na rin kanina yung sa Mindanao sortie nga ni Isko, parang quote-unquote may erasure of Willie Ong. Like, what's going on there? Bakit nga ba nagiging ganyan sa Philippine elections? Bakit biglang nalilihis at may kung ano-anong pairings na nangyayari?
Well, first, lagi naman minsan kadalasan actually, the president and the vice president come from different political camps, no? But right now, it's the fact that Duterte did not anoint an heir, and the PDP Laban doesn't have anybody strong enough there. And so parang zona libre yan sila. And yet at the same time, it's very curious, di ba? Isko Sara, may Lenny Sara, may ano, because at this point, very much the front runner si Sara. And maybe other people don't like Bongbong, but they don't want to get, on the bad side of Sara, who might, well, who by all accounts seems to be leading the rest of the pack. So, and plus the fact, of course, that her father will be president until the end,
Yeah.
until he steps down.
Yeah.
So there's also that. Nobody wants to, go against Duterte. And we know that whatever he feels about Bongbong Marcos, si Sara yan talaga para kay Dito.
Yeah. Tama. Thank you, Pia Ranadash. Pia covers Isko Moreno and Willie Ong for the 2022 elections. Yung isang nabanggit ni Willie Ong kanina nga was that when they were asked about their cabinet position, no, hindi niya sinabing DOH, basta pandemic response. So, Sofia, finally, parang ilang ulit natin to na nabanggit sa in the running na parang parating nag-gloss over or hindi binabanggit ang pandemic response in a lot of these forums. Did any of the proposals stand out or were there proposals that made your alarm bells go off?
Well, first of all, I think it was good that the debate asked about specific plans. Sana na lang all the candidates got the answer. But then some of the things that stood out for me were, well, first of all, Soto talking about prevention. I think it's a discussion that needs to be had, no, when we talk about the health of Filipinos, because we're looking also, of course, at addressing the pandemic, but also looking beyond that. So, it's something that health experts might have been pleased to hear finally brought up by a candidate. What can we do to strengthen the prevention side of um, you know COVID-19, and at the same time health at large. But at the same time, I think it's well, it should be pointed out, no, Soto mentioned about looking at drugs being developed in other countries, but we also know, for instance, that this goes beyond just looking for drugs. It also talks about, we also have to talk about making sure that we have proper health infrastructure in place. And prevention is also, we also talk about prevention when we talk about, Filipinos having access to primary health care. And I think it's also interesting though that Soto brought up prevention, because I don't know if his track record would completely 100% back him up on that, because when we talk about some of the measures that he's voted on, let's say in the Senate, just very recently, the vape regulation bill that he filed, if I'm not mistaken, the DOH and the medical community in the Philippines was very much opposed to this, because it lowered the age of access of vape products from 21 to 18. And that contrast, and that goes against the whole prevention mindset, because you're allowing more Filipino youth to be hooked on vape, which we know is not risk free. And so there's that sort of clash there. But I think another thing that stood out for me was Dr. Willie Ong's proposal, of course, about putting up an infectious disease hospital. I think this is why some health experts, for instance, say that he seems to be a doctor that interestingly enough only talks about the treatment side, which is the other side of the argument of what Soto raised. No, but then and it's a valid proposal that he brought up, putting up an infectious disease hospital. And he cited the specific experience of PGH, how so many thousands of Filipinos could not access other medical services in the country's premier general hospital. So that was a huge it's a huge thing, right? Just think about thousands of Filipinos who can't get treated for other illnesses, and how much worse that's going to be, when COVID-19 subsides. But I think interestingly enough, uh, Billy Ong didn't talk about the other side of his proposal, which would be making sure that there's adequate number of health workers and doctors to actually make those beds operational. So if we're just going to be talking about putting up hospitals again, we're just going to be experiencing the same problem of patients not having access or not being able to be admitted for whatever illness, especially during an emergency, because there aren't enough doctors and nurses to man those beds. And that's something that the entire country has experienced. Metro Manila, which is already the region that has the most number of facilities. And I think Inday can also speak the experience of the regions where this was
Yeah.
felt even more.
Yes, during the surge, um, both in Mindanao and in the Visayas, hospitals were shutting their doors temporarily, not because they had no beds, but because they lacked staff. Private hospitals in the regions have said as much as 50% of their staff have fled. Most of them to government hospitals that offer better compensation and packages, but also abroad. So there's that. Malaking problema rin. I'm actually surprised that Walden didn't raise that point because that's something that Leody has been has been repeating and repeating. Kailangan na mas magandang economic rights para sa manggagawa sa health sector. Mukhang hindi nabanggit ni Walden yun.
Can I, Bea, can I just say
Go ahead.
something about? I think the proposal of Dr. Ong shows, and his frequent reference to Mayor Isko Lopez. I think it's also a function of not having an experience in government or in
Yeah.
running a bureaucracy, unlike Senator Kiko,
Mm.
Senator Soto.
Yeah.
Kaya they can talk about their own program. So yun lang ang
Yeah.
napansin ko.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and I think also Inday, kaya hindi yata nabanggit ni Walden yun kasi in-off na yung mic niya, di ba?
In fairness to him though, even if his mic was off, rinig na rinig mo pa rin yung audio niya.
Yes.
Hindi ko alam kung kaninong mic yung nakaka-pick up kay Walden Bello, pero rinig na rinig mo pa rin siya even if his time was up. But yeah, thank you for that, Sophia. Next, we are joined by Aika Ray. Aika Ray covers Manny Pacquiao and Lito Atienza. One of the two candidates na hindi nakadalo kanina sa CNN vice presidential debates. Aika, ano bang nangyari kay Lito Atienza at bakit hindi siya nakadalo this time?
So, hindi nakadalo si Deputy Speaker Lito Atienza kasi nagpa-surgery siya ng knee niya. So, actually, yesterday, February 25, during the EDSA People Power Revolution, dun sa message niya, sinabi niya na he has just gotten out of the operating room. So, see, so yun, initially, he actually confirmed no dito sa CNN Philippines, but he had to cancel last minute kasi nga um, he had a sprain. So, yung sprain na yon, after niya magpa-check sa doctor, sinabihan siya na kailangan niya magpa-surgery. Kaya, yon. So, wala siya sa debate and we won't be seeing him in the campaign trail for at least a month, according to Senator
Yeah.
Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah. Parang kung kanina first time more or less na medyo thorough yung discussion on the pandemic response sa health side. Parang yung economic response naman ng bansa, parang yun pa ulit-ulit. Pero this would be the first time for the vice presidential candidates to really talk about it extensively. Did any of the answers earlier stand out for you, Aika? Because you also covered the economy for Rappler, by the way. Baka nagtataka kayo, bakit naman si Aika yung tinatanong natin about this?
So, actually kanina no, yung question was specific about rising oil prices and rising oil prices is actually an important topic no to talk about because kapag mas mataas yung presyo ng krudo, edi meron siyang ripple effect no to transport, to other utilities, to goods and services. So lahat talaga maapektuhan. And yung mga experts no na sabi na nila na kapag tumaas pa nga dahil last week 8 consecutive week na tumataas and possibly next week tataas ulit yung presyo ng fuel no. And yun na nga, yung inflation natin posible siyang maapektuhan at yung mga gains natin in the past few months na simula na nag-open up yung economy natin, pwede siyang maapektuhan. So important topic ito na tinanong no. And sa sa VP candidates kanina, ang maganda yung sagot actually ay kay Rizalito David, kay Walden Bello, and kay Doc Willie Ong, kahit na inulit niya lang yung kay Isko Moreno na platform, no? So basically, sinasabi ni Rizalito David ay matagal na siyang nagtatawag for the president to hold a special session, no? To call for a special session to suspend yung excise taxes, no? And to, sabi nga, possibly to reduce yung value-added tax on pump prices. So basically, sinasabi nito, kapag nangyari daw to, pag nasuspend yung excise taxes, pag nabawasan yung VAT sa pump prices, ito yung pump as in yung retail prices, no? Pag nabawasan yan, ina-expect na mga 5 pesos to 6 pesos yung mababawas, no? Dahil nga tumataas ngayon. Tapos next kay Walden Bello, sinasabi niya na important daw yung price controls and i-repeal yung oil deregulation law. So bakit importante to, no? Kaya niya sinasabi na kailangang i-repeal yung oil deregulation law kasi yung oil deregulation law, important siya at ipinasa siya kasi kailangan daw maging competitive yung pricing on fuel products. Pero ang nakikita kasi natin ngayon, even the DOE has acknowledged this, na pare-parehas lang no, yung industry take. So ibig sabihin, across oil companies, may kita mo, parang pare-parehas lang yung ini-increase sila every week kapag nagkakaroon ng increase. And si David and si Bello, parehas sila sinasabi nila na gusto nilang i-renationalize yung Petron Corporation. Yung Petron Corporation is currently managed by San Miguel Corporation. So sinasabi nila na para magkaroon ng barometer on fuel prices. So meanwhile, si Ong naman sinasabi niya kailangan daw i-slash 50% yung fuel taxes. Tsaka ang maganda sinabi niya dito kasi yung kailangan mag-push ang mas maraming renewable energy into the mix sa energy mix natin para kapag nagkaroon ng mga ganitong price shock, hindi masyadong maapektuhan yung Philippines. So, yun yung magaganda at nag-stand out na sagot kanina. Pagdating naman doon sa other two na sumagot, si Senate President Vicente Soto III, tsaka si Manny Lopez, medyo parang off the topic yung sagot nila eh. Si Senator Soto, ang tagal niyang nag-explain about dun sa kanilang BRAVE, yung parang bottom-up budgeting na platform na talaga nilang pinupush. So parang nasayang yung oras when he actually meant naman talaga na there should be subsidies available in the budget. So, sayang yung oras niya. So, I don't know if meron pa siyang gustong idagdag. Siguro makita natin yun sa Twitter niya. Mahilig naman siya mag-tweet in the next hours. Yun. Pero yung kay Lopez naman yung sinasabi niya na 0% interest loans for micro, small, and medium enterprises to cushion the impact. Medyo off-topic siya kasi hindi niya talaga na parang so same kay Soto and si Lopez, parang hindi nila masyado talagang ma-address yung root cause kung bakit wala tayong price controls on fuel. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Aika. Thank you, Aika, din sa one-on-one briefer, no? Sa oil industry dito sa Pilipinas. Aika covers Manny Pacquiao and Lito Atienza for the 2022 elections. Thanks for joining us, Aika. Next, joining us in this discussion, two reporters to symbolize yung parang kumbaga kung debate talaga ito I think these two vice presidential candidates really kind of debated it out earlier. We have Jairo Boledo, he covers Leody de Guzman and Walden Bello. And we have Rambo Talabong, he covers Senators Lacson and Senator Soto. Okay, guys, how did your vice presidential candidates do earlier? Jairo, nakakagulat ba for you na si Walden kanina was like hindi nagpipigil, like talking over some of his fellow candidates kahit nakapatay na yung mic, naririnig mo pa rin nga yung mga rebuttal niya at mga follow-up questions niya kanina.
Sa akin na nakakagulat lang talaga na part doon sa ano niya, sa performance niya sa debate. Yung nagto-talk over siya with to other vice presidential candidates. But yung Walden kasi na parang ready to kill. Sabi ko nga today, Walden woke up and he chose violence. And that's right because he's known for that. I mean, even prior to debates, he always tweets about his fellow VP candidates and other presidential candidates. Tapos lagi talaga siya may patutsada every time na may chance siya to talk about something or to talk about someone, a policy, a person, a controversial person, nagtitweet talaga siya. And kanina, it's not really surprising kasi for the past week kasi, nakita ko personally covering him, Yodi and Bello. Nakita ko yung build-up sa kanya, yung giggle niya, kumbaga. Because this is really his first big break or parang big exposure and hindi niya gustong i-waste yung opportunity na yon to show na parang seryoso talaga siya in fighting his so-called Marcos Duterte and evil. And also, nadagdag na rin dun sa peg nila, yung fighting the elitist politics. So kanina, and it's not really surprising that he went after Soto and Pangilinan. And then every time na may chance siya, at talagang inaatake niya talaga. Kumbaga, in every, parang every moment na magbubukas yung door to rebut or something, talaga may patutsada siya. And I think it's very interesting to hear Rambo's side about this because si Soto, kinocover niya din and talagang nababa din kanina with Belio.
Ginawang spokesperson bigla si Rambo. And wait lang, we have a quick playback lang of their exchange earlier about Soto's, well, Walden hitting Soto for his role in Duterte's drug war.
Something, yung rewriting of history. Si Senator Soto is rewriting history. Noong kasagsagan ng war on drugs, did he say anything critical of the president? Did he protect Senator Laila De Lima, who was a member of the Senate? No? I mean, he was just supportive during that time when the president was destroying the integrity of the Senate. No? So, Senator Soto, please don't rewrite history. You were an ally of the president until just very recently. Okay? So, let's be frank with our kababayan naman. Huwag tayo magsisinungaling dito. Kaya mahirap po yan. Hindi ho ba anti-terror law itinulak nyo? Oh boy, come on.
It's the come on for me. Rambo, si Senators Lacson and Soto, parang they're known for being, really cool, really collected when they engage in the public. How do you think he handled? Did he expect to be like in the hot seat this much during the entire debate?
I think nobody expected Walden to be so emboldened that way. As in, pumunta talaga si Walden dun para maningil, ha? As in, ito ang ulo mo, ito ang mga ginawa mo. Ang covering Lacson and Soto talagang kanilang binibida palagi, yung kanilang nagawa sa Senado. Ito ang aming nagawa, ito ang aming nagawa, ito ang aming nagawa. At si Walden Bello pumasok at sinabi na ito ang inyong ginawa, ito ang hindi niya binabanggit, ang anti-terror law, ang mga bagay na ayaw niyang banggitin, ito lahat ito. Kumbaga kung ano yung mga achievements si Lacson at Soto, doon din pinako ni Walden Bello sila. Ito ang mga hindi niyo binanggit, ito ang mga bagay na dapat nating pag-usapan. Kayo, bago niyo inaatake si Duterte, parang kakampi niyo siya kasi hindi kayo nagsasalita sa mga key issues. Hindi niyo kasing lakas magsalita ang aming partido, kami nila Leody, hindi niyo kasing lakas magsalita si Lenny Robredo. Bago lang kayo dito sa aming grupo. Bakit sinasabi niyo na hindi kayo kasali sa administrasyon at gusto niyo ng panibagong administrasyon kung magkatagal-tagal yung kasama ang kanilang administrasyon. Kaya siguro maganda rin talaga itong format na ito, Bea, kasi kung nasa stage sila, na sila lamang, syempre dire-diretso na itong ginawa nila. Pero in this opportunity, they're in equal footing. Si Senate President, and Walden Bello, I mean, former congressman siya, pero it's astounding na equal footing lang sila. Pwede silang pigilan. I mean, bahala na yung CNN dun sa moderation, pero it's really nice to see how candidates can interrupt each other and how they would react. And Soto fumbled in the beginning. Hindi siya makasagot. Kita mo rin hindi siya makasagot na maayos. And the latter half, naka-recover naman siya ng konti, but his performance has already been marked tonight as someone who's in the defensive rather than a candidate who was able to take on the wheel of his own narrative.
Yeah. And in fairness to Walden Bello, he put Soto in that defensive position. We were talking about this before we went on air. Parang in a way, I don't know if other people would agree, but in a way, people have forgotten, or Soto has tried to make people forget yung role nga niya in the earlier years of the Duterte administration. Marites or Inday, we were talking about this earlier, di ba? Na parang suddenly, because of a Walden Bello, parang ito, reminding everyone, ito yung nangyari just 4 years ago? 5 years ago?
Yeah, and also, Tito Soto and Lacson kasi brand themselves as somewhat in the middle. They agree with some of Duterte's policies, disagree with some, so they don't brand themselves completely as opposition. So yun, kaya nahirapan, mahirap yun eh, you're in between two sides. So ang maganda kay Walden, he really, as you said, Bea, put him on the defensive. And yes, a very good point you raised is that it reminded the public of also the alliance between Soto and Duterte, which he did not deny anyway.
Dian?
Isa rin sa
Sorry.
mga tama nga yung
Wait, Inday, I think is trying to. She's just muted. Inday, you are mute. There
Numbers
we go.
lang, konti lang
Yes.
dun sa
Yes.
numbers. Ang mahalagang nagawa ni Walden is na corner niya si Soto in such a way na kahit sinabi ni Soto muna na independent kami, no? Just because I'm an ally, just because I'm a friend doesn't mean I'm not I'm an ally, and then nag-independent siya. But in the end, dahil nga sa kakapress ni Walden, talagang he toed the line in the ano ang EGK, ano ang numbers, bakit he doesn't think the numbers are like what Walden and the other human rights organizations had said, no? And hindi niya, and I think si Lian na itong mag-ano, na the whole impact of the ICC there is actually na ang tao na nasa ICC ang nagsabi mismo na ang Davao Death Squad, which is basically vigilante squads in Davao City, were answering to Duterte and his topmost aide. So parang people will remember that when they think of Soto.
Dian, you were saying.
Talagang tama yung word na ginamit ni Rambo na panahon to ng paniningil kay Tito Soto. Kasi isa sa mga sinagot niya kanina tungkol sa tanong kung isasama mo ba ulit yung Pilipinas sa ICC. Sabi niya, oo naman, it's a very glowing and very quick oo naman. Pero kailangang matandaan ng mga tao na noong 2018, lumapit ang mga minority senator sa Korte Suprema para sana ipa-overturn yung withdrawal ni President Duterte mula sa International Criminal Court. Hindi sila sinamahan nila Tito Soto. They were just the opposition bloc sila. Pangilinan, Risa Ontiveros, Laila de Lima, Bam Aquino, Sonny Trillanes, and Frank Drilon. Tapos nung 2020, nung nag-unilateral withdrawal ulit si President Duterte mula sa Visiting Forces Agreement, the Senate as a whole petitioned the Supreme Court, including Tito Soto, at kasama siya na nagpapapicture dun sa harap ng Supreme Court. And I remember asking him, same principle lang naman po yung at play, di ba? Parang you are contesting the president's unilateral powers. Then why didn't you join the minority senators back in 2018? This is the very same question. Tapos hindi nila masagot ng maayos. According to Senator Laila de Lima, the answer is because human rights at the time was not very sexy, or it would not earn you brownie points from either the president or the president supporters. So paniningil talaga to kala Tito Soto of how they enabled this regime na under investigation for crimes against humanity.
Sa akin, last point lang dun. Ay, sorry.
Go ahead.
A quick point lang. Isa rin kasi sa mga bagay kung bakit talaga na-put on the spot or na-corner si Tito Sen is hindi na expect kasi that, I don't know, maybe they didn't expect na Walden will come after them kasi si Walden is very, anti-Marcos, anti-Duterte. So they never really expected na parang, alam mo yun, na ginawa pala ni Walden yung assignment niya, binacktrack niya pala. Even the tax laws, I've been covering Walden.
Yeah.
And parang ay grabe si sir, even the tax law na napasa during Tito Soto's time na sinayin ni Kiko Pangilinan, lahat siningil niya. So he really made his, finish his assignment talaga.
Siguro malas din ng dalawang gentlemen from the Senate na wala si Sara Duterte, na hinanap at tinawag ni Walden Bello na duwag in Bisaya. So, imbes na doon yung energies niya napunta sa dalawang senators. You were saying?
I think the intent of Walden Bello is draw a clear line between good and evil. And to his mind, the good is sila ni Leody and the evil are everybody else. Kaya I think meron nagsabi kanina na it was without Sara, si Tito Soto talaga yung target niya. Pero minsan, nadadaplisan niya rin si Kiko Pangilinan. Because let's remember, for the Partido Laban ng Masa and yung kay Leody, the liberal parties are still elites. Kasama pa rin si Kiko Pangilinan dyan. Kaya siguro, para sa akin, ang intent kanina ni Walden Bello is really to draw the line na lahat kayo elitista, kami yung magsusulong ng interes ng masa.
Thanks, Ian. I just have one last question for Rambo. Kasi I wonder nga, kasi parang it was pointed out earlier, di ba, na the Soto-Lacson, the Lacson-Soto tandem rather, they want to place themselves in the middle, I suppose. Siguro medyo leaning opposition pero gitna. Pero ang ginawa more or less ni Walden Bello kanina, sabi niya, "Ops, hindi kayo belong dito. Doon kayo, doon kayo. You're one of them." Parang ganun. How have they been handling this during the campaign? Whenever this comes up, questions of their track record, their voting record under the Duterte administration. How have they been answering this? Parang, is this the first time na ganito ka-amplified siguro yung pag-corner sa kanila or sa kanya rather in this specific case?
Yeah, interesting. First time itong talagang siningil sila sa kanilang political leanings at least dito sa campaign period kasi for the past few weeks, palaging on their own merit, for example, si Lacson about his past, the martial law, about him being a
Yeah.
fugitive for a period of time. Wala masyado on them leaning here and there during the Duterte administration. Si Soto rin, meron pa siyang statement sa martial law na hindi din natin alam kanilang role dito, medyo vague kasi si Lacson nga, di ba, bahagi rin siya ng Metrocom. Ngayon lang
Yes.
talaga yung sinabihan sila dito sa question of them standing in a vague place. Kasi at the start, tinatanong talaga natin sila, ano po ba ang inyong branding? Opposition ba kayo? And the brand that they're trying to say that they are is basically we're non-administration candidates. Basta hindi kami administrasyon. Siyempre, that works to their advantage. Pwede na sabihin na, bahagi kami dito. Nung naipasa itong magandang batas, Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2, kasama ako dyan. Yun yung sinabi kanina ni Soto. Pero ayun, pwede na i-point out sa kanila na, oo nga, bahagi pa rin kayo ng administrasyon. Pero hindi pwedeng bahagi ka ng administrasyon mamaya, pero mamaya hindi ka bahagi ng administrasyon. At dito nga talaga papasok si Walden kung saan pinakita niya na, oo nga, parang kayo, kailangan ikwento mo ng tama. Hindi pwedeng yung magagandang bahagi lang ng pagtawid nyo sa bahagi ng administrasyon at hindi. Kailangan mo sabihin na meron ding mga mali at kontrobersyal na bahagi sa inyong alyansa kasama si Duterte. At yan nga, yung paulit-ulit na sinasabi ni Walden Bello, don't rewrite history. At yun na nakita natin ngayong gabi.
Thank you, Rambo. Rambo covers the campaign of Senators Lacson and Soto for Rappler. Jairo, hindi ka muna aalis, dito ka muna. May pag-uusapan pa tayo ulit. But we have a quick playback of another Walden Bello zinger. Feeling ko hindi niyo to makakalimutan, pero playback pa rin natin para lang ma-relive sa memories natin yung mga sinabi ni Walden Bello kanina.
Stace. Well, the Marcos dynasty and the Duterte dynasty, we're seeing how they represent really the greatest evil of the political system that we have. Which is why it is very important for our people, if you really want to oppose political dynasties, here is the two dynasties that they boast. The South and the North Raw will get together to eat up the Philippines. The task is up to our voters. Do not elect these dynastic cliques coming to power. Make sure that you tell them that you are not going to come to power just to eat up the Philippines between the two of you. So nasa sa voters niyan ngayon. Okay? And that is why we are appealing, don't vote for these dynasts. And I'm really terribly sorry that Mayor Duterte is not here to face the people. She is a coward. Just like Bongbong Marcos is a fucking coward.
Open naman po tayo just in case gustong magpadala ng response ni Mayor Sara Duterte.
I would love to debate her. Wow.
And there you go, a curse word live on CNN Philippines. Jairo, can you give us a short background lang? Bakit nga ba bring up din ito ulit ni Walden kanina na yung Duterte Marcos dynasty? This is also a cornerstone of their campaign, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. Alam mo, Bea, hindi kasi ito yung first time na na nagmura on live television si Walden Bello. The first time was in 2021, live on ANC with Christian Sguerra. He blasted Marcos with the F word. Sabi niya talaga, F you Marcos, pertaining to trolls and the martial law abuses. And then every time that he has a chance, he would really curse at Marcos. I mean, I remember in his campaign rally talaga, in his speech, talagang in-emphasize niya talaga, let me say this once again, F you Marcos. So it's not really surprising that he done it again. Sabi ka nga, di ba? Parang sabi ka ni Britney Spears, oops, I did it again, something like that. And yeah, para naging part na yun talaga ng campaign niya. It's not about, cursing and being, attacking them. No way.
Yeah.
It's really a proof na they're really, really true to their
Yeah.
campaign, the cornerstone of their campaign, which is the fighting the anti-Marcos, fighting the Marcos Duterte axis of evil. It just happened that talagang parang he was really waiting for the chance to say it or to also slam Sara Duterte.
Yeah.
It just happened that Sara wasn't there. So parang nung may chance siya, so opening statement niya talagang I don't know if it's in Ilocano or Bisaya then, but he said na parang, nasaan ka Inday? Parang, where are
Yeah.
you Inday? And then, on the latter part of the debate, he basically tagged Inday as a coward, just like Marcos.
Bisaya yun. Para siguro to drive the point home sa language ni Inday mismo. For context lang din, no, parang earlier surveys have shown that for you to understand din bakit may ganitong appeal si Bello, no, to not vote dynasties into power, because previous surveys have shown that Filipinos don't really care. The electorate doesn't really, they're not averse to dynasties. In fact, parang I think the numbers say no, close to 50% would vote for candidates from political dynasties. Tas parang 25 lang yung actively will reject dynasties. Maritas, you wanted to say something about campaigning, negative campaigning?
Yes. That's actually, I was thinking, sabi ko, parang Walden is so refreshing because, well, in the past election campaigns, siguro not 2019, but earlier, ang daming, don't you miss the bomba, the negative campaigning, the wag mong iboto si ganyan. But now there seems to be, it's so clean. Nobody wants to attack anyone by name. Kasi recent studies have shown, FGDs have shown here in the
Yeah.
Philippines na
Yes.
hindi pala effective ang negative campaigning. So that's why I found Walden, I think, different. Parang in the US kasi you can do negative campaigning. There's the Lincoln Project when Trump was running in 2019, I think, 2020. So yun lang, na may, hindi na natin naririnig yan sa major candidates. In fact, Bongbong Marcos said, I don't do negative campaigning. And then if you listen to VP Lenny, walang reference to any rival candidate. So maybe that's just why Walden hit it so well with some
Yeah.
people.
I would imagine a lot of campaign strategists, well-meaning as they might be, parang advising candidates nga na huwag kang mag-negative kasi hindi yan bebenta sa mga voters. Lian, you had a question about yung good vibes only na nanaig sa kampanya.
Oh, alam naman natin ang reyna at hari na at reyna ng good vibes only campaigning at yan ang unity team na talagang ginawa na talaga nilang tagline. Actually, first time to hear that meron ng studies that show that negative campaigning isn't effective. Siguro tanong ko lang sa inyong lahat to pick all of your brains. Pagkatapos nating dumaan sa pandemya, sa gutom, sa sorrow, sa despair, 'di ba naging malaking usapin sa ating lahat yung tigilan na natin yung toxic positivity. Kasi 'di ba yung pandemic, yun yung laging nabibira na parang stay positive, nagkaka-virus na tayong lahat, ganun. Wala ba yung traction? Hindi ba nun kayang basagin yung good vibes only campaigning illusion na gustong gawin ng ibang kampanya, particularly the Unity Team?
Does anyone have kasi may thoughts na ako na ganyan. Kasi pinoproblema ko rin yan. At hindi ko pinoproblema, iniisip ko rin yan. Bakit nga ba averse tayo sa... My theory is you can challenge and engage in negative campaigning, but the candidate shouldn't do it. Kailangan maghanap ka ng baka nga kahit hindi spokesperson, kasi kung spokesperson parang extension yun ng kandidato, di ba? Pero maghanap ka ng isang tao na kumbaga attack dog mo yun. Kaya nga uso din yung attack dog sa Philippine politics, no? Pero parang hindi talaga. I think maybe it's also because Filipinos want a leader who inspires. Ayaw nila yung naninira ng kapwa, quote unquote, kasi that's how you can, oversimplify it rather, yung pag-challenge nga ng sa capabilities ng mga kalaban mo. But I don't know, maybe Marites or Inday have sharper insights than I do.
I understand that, except there's one elephant in the room. How do we explain Duterte?
Yeah. Oh,
You know,
yeah.
but okay, aside from the president, um, see, Bongbong doesn't do it because he's got all this, there's a great army of maybe a lot of artificial creatures doing the dirty job for him,
Yeah.
attacking other candidates, including the supporters of other candidates. Pero I think then like I've always been thinking is ano ito in practical terms, no? At nakita natin nung pumunta si Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Sa Bacolod, remember? Yung
Mhm.
controversy na natapunan raw siya ng flyers. Ang gulat na
Mhm.
gulat ako when I saw the campaign teams, local campaign teams of Vice President Robredo immediately apologized and called for a probe. Na parang sabi ko, teka muna, dahil sinigawan nila na magnanakaw si Ferdinand Marcos Jr., parang, where do we draw the line? I mean, di ba, parang, pwede bang manalo na tweetams lang na tweetams? Eh, si Vice President Robredo naman is big on truth-telling. So, there should be siguro medyo konting balance nila somewhere along the way dyan.
Yeah.
May dagdag lang ako 'no, may addendum lang ako kay Inday. Yung
Addendum.
the yung the electorate wanting or at least being gusto nila yung very feel good, positive vibes. I can get on with that. Ang nakikita ko lang na sad consequence nun ay they expect also the media to get on with that when kapag tough na yung media, ayaw na nila. And kailangan ko nang banggitin. Kaya nga, ang projection ng SMNI ay sila yung superior debate, di ba? And you have Attorney Karen Jimeno praising the debate kasi nga walang nagsigawan, wala daw mudslinging allegedly. But what's lost in the discussion is hindi naman to nega just for the sake of being nega, di ba? We have been in a pandemic for 2 years, maraming namamatay. This is about accountability and singilan. At pag hinayaan natin na mamayagpag yung idea na positive lang tayo, masaya lang tayo, then that would be a disservice to everyone who has lost loved ones, yung mga nawalan ng rights, yung mga nakulong, yung mga nawalan ng trabaho. Kasi paano naman sila mabibigyan ng hustisya and accountability kung masaya lang tayong lahat? So, sadly, yun yung nagiging consequence. By extension, they expect media to also be feel good, feel good. Pero, hindi yun role. Adversarial talaga tayo and I think kailangan ng better job siguro ng media na rin and the stakeholders to communicate to the people that we are not here to be tweetums. Parang kailangan talaga nating maging adversarial.
Kaya sa
Jaira.
akin naman, yeah, thank you, Bea. Sa akin naman, it's really part kasi, we have to name names, di ba? One of the most popular lines ng mga trolls or some supporters of the dictator son is that sila na inapi, pero never silang like lumaban. Because this is really part of their narrative na sila yung underdog, sila yung inapi for the past 36 years, sila yung pinalaya sa Pilipinas, sila yung tinanggalan ng tinanggalan ng kayamanan, ng kapangyarihan. When in fact, all of these narrative, even the good vibes, I think, this is really part of their so-called yung Marcos rehabilitation. And sabi nga ni Carmelo Crisanto, Director Carmelo Crisanto, yung director ng Human Rights Commission Violation Memorial Commission, isa sa mga under commissions ng CHR is talagang the Marcoses really invested in their in persist in they really invested in their rehabilitation para makita nila yung Marcos brand even until now. So they're successful sila. And the positive lang, the good vibes lang, the happy lang is really part of the Filipino culture kasi na parang yung mga naaapi, we have this tendency of, side with the naaapi and that di sila mabait sila, di sila lumalaban, positive lang. So maybe, they would attract voters to side with them and vote for them.
Parang ginawang kontrabida at bida ang
Yes.
narrative or that's the
Really
narrative that you want.
opera.
Yeah, and I think people need to remember that actual governance, like when they are elected into office, that's not good vibes. Like, may mga sigawan na mangyayari dyan. And that's not a bad thing, di ba? Parang arguments over policy and implementation that happens when you're elected into office. Thank you, Jairo, for joining us tonight. Next, we have Michelle Abad, who covers Kiko Pangilinan for the 2022 elections. Michelle, how did the senator do? Were there any things that stood out? Although parang nadamay din siya or naging target din siya from time to time ni Walden Bello during several parts of the debate.
Yes, Bea, I think one way that I would sum up Senator Kiko's performance during the debate is really he was very consistent, especially with regard to his pet issue, which is really agriculture. So we know that Senator Kiko has been in the Senate for for around 20 years already, and he has been time and again fighting for the rights of farmers and fisher folks, and we did see that during his performance in the debate. From the opening statement pa lang, 'di ba, nabanggit na niya yung mga plataporma niya para sa mga fisher folk at farmers. And parang nakita ko din na kahit ibang issue yung tinatanong sa kanya, talagang binabalik niya sa agriculture. For example, yung sa corruption, binalik niya sa kung ano yung ginawa niya sa NFA kasi for a time nung 2014 in-appoint siya as food security czar ni late President Benigno Aquino III. Nung education, tinanong siya ano yung platform ng education ng Robredo and Pangilinan, pero binalik niya na the students need to be fed well para makapag-aral sila. If you assume the presidency, should an emergency happen, anong gagawin mo? And then, syempre, binalik niya na naman na we will forward yung aming campaign with regards to putting first the marginalized and, of course, fighting for the rights of farmers and fisher folk. So very, very consistent talaga siya.
Lian, may part sa mga sagot ni Senator Pangilinan kanina na talagang medyo nag-perk up yung ears mo as our justice reporter in Rappler. Like, can you walk us through yung mga issues that the senator talked about earlier?
Oo, talagang yung tenga ko gumanon. Kasi siya talaga yung, I think, hindi naman intentional nung debate format or even ng questions na tanungin about judicial reform. Pero si Senator Kiko Pangilinan, who's a lawyer, siya talaga yung nagpupush nung justice reform to the point that pati yung tanong dun sa paano mo i-resolve yung systemic corruption sa BIR. Judicial reform pa rin yung sagot niya and gets ko siya. Ang sagot niya ay kailangang taasan yung sweldo at yung benepisyo ng mga piskal at ng mga judges para mapuno yung mga vacancy. Kasi kung walang judge and walang prosecutor, hindi uusad ang mga inquest, mga prosecution at mga trial. At malaking problema talaga yan. Kahit dito lang sa Duterte administration, sobrang laking problema talaga niyan. Kasi meron talagang brain drain, kumbaga, kasi bakit ka naman magogobyerno kung you can earn 4 times, 5 times as much in a private firm. And I get Senator Pangilinan when even asked a different question about solving corruption in BIR, he would still say, taasan ang benepisyo ng mga piskal at ng mga judge. Because so many of our problems have the same root. It's impunity. Kaya naman nangyayari yung mga masasamang bagay is because yung mga gumagawa ng masasamang bagay, hindi sila napapanagot. And maganda na na pinupush niya yun kasi kailangan ma-realize ng mga tao na the judiciary, justice, it's very malayo sa bituka, hindi siya kasing gut issue like siguro tax or presyo ng langis, pero yung ginagawang pahirap sa buhay natin, that roots from impunity. So it's very important and I hope that the next debates can tackle much more than that kasi bukod sa pagdadagdag ng benepisyo at sweldo ng judges and prosecutors, I think we need to hear more, siguro not necessarily from the VPs kasi yun nga, wala naman silang mandate na gano'n. Pero sa mga presidents, kung ano pa yung judicial reform beyond that, kasi there's so much to be said also about our penal system, yung jail prison reform, gano'n. Yung decriminalizing a lot of the offenses, imagine mo, hindi ka lang nagmas na kulong ka na. Ang daming or ang daming na-oppress na mga mahihirap na hindi makapagpiyansa just because very criminal centric yung ating justice system. So I hope that the next debates can tackle more judicial reform topics.
Parang kumbaga ang hindi siya gut issue pero dapat gut issue siya.
Yes, oo.
And hope, di ba, sobrang excited si Lian na pinag-usapan natin ang judiciary reform. Thank you, Lian, and thank you, Michelle. Lian covers justice and Michelle covers Kiko Pangilinan for Rappler. Ayoko naman sabihin other candidates, no? Pero syempre, like, kung prominence lang, 3 other vice presidential candidates did join the debate earlier. Were there any answers that stood out for you, or did their presence make you prompt questions from you after the debate?
Ako may kay Doc Willie Ong, no? I think I related to his answer about political dynasty. Sabi niya, wala naman akong dynasty, wala ring dynasty si Isko Moreno, pero para sa kanya, impossible na mapasa ang anti-political dynasty law. And sabi mo nga, Bea, hindi naman averse yung mga tao sa political dynasty. So he was saying, imbis na i-push natin ang very unrealistic anti-political dynasty law, why don't we meet in the middle? Dapat may term break. Kapag nag-serve na yung asawa, then maybe for the next 3 years, hindi pwedeng mag-serve yung anak or yung asawa or something like that. So maybe there's a discussion to be made also about whether there can be a middle ground to solve the problems that beset our politics when it comes to political dynasties.
Yes, and yes, Marites.
I just wanted, just for a step back a bit, kasi nga when I was watching the vice presidential debate earlier, sabi ko, wala na bang tighter screening of vice presidential candidates or even maybe for other positions? Isn't the COMELEC, kasi we have a very low bar. So naisip ko lang, does it have to have a constitutional amendment to tighten the qualifications for these top positions? Well, if someone among the candidates said that he was destined for greatness, isn't that an alarm bell? But anyway, I don't want to. That's just a thought that I got, kasi nagulat lang ako na ganito ba ang ating quality ng discussions?
Inday? Inday, you're on mute. There you
Okay, just with no disrespect to any candidate, but I always thought, Marites, that candidates usually had just this edge in them because they all seem to believe that they're destined for greatness. So you need a certain kind of edge on that matter para tumakbo ka talaga ng national office, whether or not you're going to win. No? But ako, Bea, isa lang ang dadagdag ko. Let's go back to toxic positivity and all these good vibes. Whether it's addressed to media or it's addressed to campaigners and voters in general. Baka naman feel good kayo, pero nakakalimutan nyo, ang nawawala sa inyo, yung access nyo sa katotohanan. Yun lang talaga ang gusto ko i-stress.
Yeah. And speaking of lack of access, I mean, the very fact, the fact na wala si Sara Duterte there earlier meant that we don't know her stand on a lot of important issues. I mean, we can do research on her previous pronouncements as Davao mayor or even as vice mayor before, pero iba pa rin naman yung, 'di ba, kung ano ba ang tingin niya sa mga issue that national candidates are expected to be updated on now that she's gunning for the second highest post in the land, and if she wins and if the president, there's an emergency or whatever, she has to take over the post. So I mean, that's a huge loss for all of us that we don't even know how the survey frontrunner is thinking at this point. Tomorrow, CNN Philippines will be holding their presidential debate. All bets are going again, save for, no surprise there, the unit team standard bearer Bongbong Marcos Jr. Kaya makikita mo ulit ako at si Lian dito to talk about the bets who are our bets, the bets that we cover who do not attend these debates. I'd like to thank our panelists, Marites Vitog and Verona, and reporters Lian Buwan, Sofia Toma Cruz, as well as our campaign reporters for joining us tonight in this panel. This brings to a close this special episode of In the Running, a panel discussion on the vice presidential debates organized by CNN Philippines. Tune in to Rappler special coverage of the 2022 elections. I'm Beko Pin. Thank you for watching. Bye. Good night.